explaining the Chinese Civil War. In the early 20th century, China was divided amongst multiple warlords. Because of this, the Kuomintang, the group that led the revolution that got rid of the Qing dynasty in China, would create a government in the south to reunite China. However, during the May the 4th movement in 1919, due to anti-Japanese sentiments, the Communist Party of China would be created. However, the two groups were intertwined, as the Soviet Union initially supported the Kuomintang with supplies in exchange for them forming a united front with the small Communist Party. However, in 1926, things would change as Chiang Kai-shek, an anti-communist, would become the leader of the Kuomintang. The Kuomintang would then launch the Northern Expedition in an attempt to reunite China. The Communist Party, who were still at this time allies of the Kuomintang, would help the Kuomintang capture Shanghai. However, in 1927, foreigners in Nanjing would be killed, and Chiang Kai-shek would blame this on the Communists. Chiang Kai-shek would hire criminals within Shanghai to assassinate multiple Communist members, and the Kuomintang would temporarily be split, starting the Civil War. Communist troops would rise up in the south and would recruit local ethnic Hakkas. However, Zhou Enlai and a few thousand men would be forced out of Nanjing in August of 1927 in the Little Long March. Meanwhile, Mao Zedong's Autumn Harvest Uprising and Guangzhou Uprising would both fail. While this was going on, the Kuomintang temporarily reunited China. However, in 1930, the Central Plains War would break out. This would allow Mao Zedong to temporarily set up a Soviet in the Jiangxi Mountains. In 1930, the Kuomintang would attempt to encircle him. However, this would fail, and more Soviets would be set up nearby, and in 1931, they would unite. These Soviets would unite into the Chinese Soviet Republic in 1931, just around the same time as the Japanese began to invade Manchuria. However, despite the fact that the Japanese were invading Manchuria, Chiang kept on launching even bigger encirclements, and in 1935, the Communists were forced to go on their now famous Long March. Many warlords, not wanting to lose their own troops, would not confront the Communists, and so Chiang would hire bandits to harass them. The now mostly peasant-based Communists would then set up a base near Shaanxi. However, the war would be put on pause when warlords in China demanded that Chiang form a united front with the Communists in 1936, fearing that the Japanese would invade, and that theory would come true when in 1937 the Japanese would invade, starting the Second Sino-Japanese War. Even though both the Communists and the Kuomintang opposed the Japanese during the war, they still tried to gain support in China. Both groups would occasionally fight each other. However, in 1940, things went too far when the Kuomintang intentionally ambushed Communist troops. This would see the breakdown of the United Front. However, the Communists would gain support due to their guerrilla tactics, which were popular, and the Kuomintang would lose support due to their oppression and controversial tactics, such as flooding the Yellow River. By the end of the war in 1945, the Communists would have a couple million troops at their disposal. The Soviets would begin to invade Manchuria, which was previously under the control of the Japanese, and would help the Communists move into land that had been vacated by the Japanese. They would also launch campaigns against the Kuomintang and warlords. The Kuomintang would leave Japanese troops within Chinese cities to stop the Communist advance, and some warlords would even bring the Japanese troops into their armies. The international community would attempt to make peace between the two parties. However, relations would break down and the Civil War would continue. Even though the Kuomintang had troops stationed to defend Manchuria, the Soviets controlled it and would hand it over to the Communists. Because of this, in 1947 the Kuomintang would launch a huge offensive. However, this would fail and would result in the death of 1 million Kuomintang troops. This would allow the Communists to expand their holdings in northeast China throughout 1947 and 1948. By late 1948, the Communists had reached as far south as Luoyang, and had not suffered the disunity that the Kuomintang had. This would allow them to launch 3 separate campaigns. The Liao Shen campaign would capture all of Manchuria, the Huai campaign, which would give the Communists control of central China, and the Ping-Jing campaign, which would end in 1949 when Beijing fell to the Communists. Because of the defeats, Chiang Kai-shek would resign and Li Zhongri would come into power of the Kuomintang, and he would reject all of Mao's commands. Because of this, in early 1949, Mao would advance and would take multiple key cities. In the northwest, the Communists would capture more land, and this would persuade the leaders of Xinjiang, who had been in a state of war for multiple years now, to surrender to the Communists. Chiang Kai-shek, now trapped in Chengdu, would flee to the island of Taiwan along with around 1 million refugees. The Communists would continue to advance until they had taken all of mainland China. The Communists would attempt to launch an invasion on Taiwan, however this would fail. Diplomatic relations between the Communists and the Tibetans would break down, which would lead to the Communists invading Tibet and completely annexing it. By then, however, the Korean War had broken out, and the Communists would begin to get involved, which would leave the war on standhold until where it is today. In conclusion, the Chinese Civil War was a war for reunification between which party should rule all of China, either the Kuomintang or the Communist Party. To this day, the war is still technically going on, as peace was never truly declared. Thank you for watching this video on the Chinese Civil War.